Hopefully everyone can find a seat. And I'm glad to see people are really digging into those donuts and wonderful cookies that we have back there and coffee. And that's great. I'm looking forward to another dose of all of that here after the program. But good morning, everyone. Again, so pleased to see everyone here this morning. Just a drop batch of fall programs just about to finalize and get out on our website, letting people know what we've got in store for next fall. It looks like a great batch of programs. I'm really excited about next fall's programming schedule. So keep an eye open for that. And beyond that, I think these last two programs, this one today and the program for next week, a week from today, right here, same time, same spot. These are two programs that really we plugged into our spring schedule here in May. And because we saw these two young presenters who had been volunteers and an intern here at Chico at our museum here, really wanting and ready to make presentations on interests they already had or interests they picked up here during their time here at the museum. For Sean Keehn here, our presenter today, he came over to the museum as an intern from Chico State and Mike Magliari's class, and the museum again had high hopes about putting together a Chico State and Pioneer Day exhibit into our museum, and we didn't quite finish that up. All of that still is going to be our focus here for our big new exhibit here, hopefully coming this fall. But Sean stepped right into that, and he's been here consistently the entire semester, here several times a week, doing his research on his laptop. Of course, it's always interesting for a person like me here from that ancient time of not so long ago to see research done through the computer world and not in a book. But Sean, again, has really showed me a consistency and interest and a capability. He's just graduated this last May from Chico State with a degree in history and an emphasis in public history. He's back down now in his hometown of Sacramento and considering going further with his education and looking at a master's. So again, he's going to be presenting here on his interest here in the museum here over this last spring. Next week we're going to have another volunteer here, Gabrielle Culbertson, and she's going to be here to speak on the story of the Black history in the Sacramento Valley, 1863 to 1913. And she too has really had and carries forward a real interest in multicultural components within our American story, and even in a broader sense there, the mixing of all of our cultural stories on a global basis. Gabrielle has a degree in cultural anthropology from, what was it? No, Western Washington University. Now she's working here at Chico State, and been a volunteer here, so she's going to give us a program next week. I think it should be a good one. I'm looking forward to it. And really, I think that's enough blabbing. And I'm going to turn this over to our presenter today, Sean Keehn.
Thanks, Steve. All right, let's move this up here a little bit. All right, so yeah, I've been interning here, and so somehow got into Pioneer Day. Honestly, kind of forgot. I'm gonna make sure I'm actually speaking into the mic. But yeah, trying to figure out how to intro this really. But I specifically got interested in kind of how disorganized it always seemed to be. Yeah, it kind of never really had a central authority. But so let me. There we go. So first, I feel most people here probably know what Pioneer Day is. Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And live.
Yep. Yeah, and just to give a quick note for the few people who might not know, basically, big old spring celebration, had a ton of different events and stuff and traditions we'll go into, but kind of the big thing is that it was very different every year, and it never really had a very specific set. It always was changing, especially due to a lot of it was done by students who of course would be coming and going as they were, applying and graduating from college. It's the big point that I want to make is that it's super decentralized and organic nature, and that it was never set up by one central authority. Really allowed it to have an organic and rapid growth to basically consume the whole town. But it also created characteristics within it that led to its downfall. Yeah, one quick note also, Pioneer Day obviously had a lot of different names. I'm probably just going to stick with Pioneer Day, just to keep it simple. It did become Pioneer Week, but it's all the same thing really. So basically, I'm going to just go into how it came about, then talk about what it was, the traditions and everything. And then talk about the bad stuff, basically. So the big point is that it didn't really have one origin, right? Its origins are pretty scattered. The most common answer you get if you ask people is that it came from Chico Normal School in that day, their senior day, which was basically kind of like an old version of today's, Choose Chico Day. Basically trying to get people to come apply to the college, get them to attend. A little more than just free lunch and free tours, pretty simple. And originally it was just Chico High. However, after a few years they started getting people in from Durham and other, neighboring communities. But one of the big important things is that even though this is listed as the start of Pioneer Day, it really didn't have any pioneer theme. It had no pioneer connection whatsoever. That would come in a bit later with kind of two sources. It's a little bit unknown. The sources kind of were scattered and nobody's really said why. You kind of have to read between the lines a bit. The big one I'm going to say is the Sacramento Days of 49 Festival. It was held, basically I believe early 20s. The big year that I'm bringing up is 1922. Because that is the year that the Whiskerinos, which were a social club, right, about anybody who had a beard or a mustache. Yeah, this dude's very nice mustache there. Presumably there weren't that many men with such glorious facial hair. And so they sent a call to Chico and asked for people to come down and join them in the celebration. 2 people joined them. This guy's one of them. Could not find a photo for the other guy. And the big things when they came back, they kind of wanted to start their own chapter of it up in Chico because they thought it was such a fun time. It took them a few years, didn't get it till 1925. And then the other big source there was actually a little earlier, was the Chico High had their own Pioneer Day that first held in 1920 as Get Together Day. Basically just a small school spirit event. They would encourage students to dress up as pioneers and they had like a picnic lunch and a baseball game. And it was just simple school spirit stuff, nothing like what Pioneer Day would become later. And by 1922, it did become kind of officially known as Pioneer Day. I mean, even in 1920, it was kind of referred to as that unofficially. And my guess is that they got this from the Days of 49 festival, because it did happen a little bit before 22. But like I said, the sources are all pretty short. There's little snippets in newspapers and such. So I can't really definitively say. And eventually by, like I said, like 1925, when the Whiskerinos Club gets started in Chico, it becomes a combined Seniors and Pioneer Day, at least according to some of the newspapers back then. And it basically just seems to be the college kind of co-opting the high school's Pioneer Day to try to, get even more people in for their senior day. Yeah, and then by 1927, it dropped the whole combined thing and it just became Pioneer Day. Although 1928, they actually had to postpone it, apparently because it got a little too rowdy the year before. Yeah, that's a lot of foreshadowing there. Yeah, and so the college students decided to host Nepenthe Days, which Nepenthe is the ancient Greek drink of forgetfulness, which is quite fitting. Yeah, that only lasted 1 year though, because for some unknown reason, Pioneer Day was back for 1929, and then it kicked off from there. So now talk about where it went, what the traditions were, what they became. So, one of the big ones, parties, obviously, what everybody knows. Because a lot of what Pioneer Day was done by the fraternities and sororities of Chico. And so obviously, they're going to have some parties. They're probably a little different than some of the parties in the later years, but they seem to be about the same. Obviously, a lot of drinking, later on, a lot of drugs, and that kind of caused contentions, as did the unjudicious use of firearms in some instances. Yeah, the school officially said that if you were going to carry a firearm, they weren't allowed to be loaded, but we don't know if people listen to that. Well, I mean, we kind of do. And the parties, I mean, obviously weren't sanctioned by anybody. There was no official organizing, really. It was just the frats and the sororities doing it, and that school wasn't really part of this part of Pioneer Day. They didn't really have a lot of control, and that they weren't happy about not having that control because it still made them look bad. But now things that the school did have a little more control over, still not really, because Sheriff and Little Nell here, still pretty much frats and sororities. Sheriff and Little Nell, basically kind of like a prom king and queen. They were elected, each frat and sorority put up one candidate. Yeah, I cannot remember what year this was. I should know it, but I forgot. But basically, they would be like kind of leading the parade, and they just do a bunch of, and then they had a bunch of other weird little rituals that kind of came and went. The big one is the kidnapping, which, from what I understand, a few years was a little bit more real than it should have been. Yeah, there were some years where, I forget, it was somewhere in the 40s, I believe, they took Little Nell like 2 hours away. Yeah, that one, the school was not happy. Because, yeah, it took them a little too long to find her. Yeah. So, it kind of had that. I don't have a ton on them because, like I said, it really changed year to year. Mostly it was just sort of like the prom king and queen, just like the face of the event. The other big one that I think most people here would remember is the quad projects. Yeah. Yeah, they built, basically a little town, and this is actually kind of neat because a lot of it was based on the history of Chico and historic buildings of Chico. This year's Diamond Match Sawmill, I think it was 87, or somewhere in the 80s or 70s. Definitely 70s because there is a TV, which that's not historically accurate, but But this one was definitely kind of controlled by the school because, obviously it's on the school's lawn. They gotta have permission for this. I don't think the school would be too happy with somebody just showing up with some 2x4s. And that's the big cool thing is these were open to the public, right? Anybody, not just students, anybody could come and visit them. It was a really good event because, you know, things like the parties, like they had tensions between this, like the students and the town. This helped alleviate those in many ways. And they also really kind of showed off how much Pioneer Day was like carried by the fraternities and sororities because they put a lot of money and a lot of time and effort into this. I think I saw a figure of like a couple of frats spending like $2,000 in like 1970s money on one of these, which the school liked it. They also kind of were a little afraid because, you know, also they were doing this instead of their classwork. Just a little bit more on them here. You can see like this little map of them. It was basically like a little town. Got all the frats there. A couple of non-frat organizations there, like generating developmental ideas. So it was just kind of everybody. This was mostly frats because this was on the school. Next thing, you know, just little events here and there. Plays, you know, concerts. There was a rodeo for a good number of years. I didn't really put that on its own category because it kind of came and went. It was there for a good number, but yeah, it wasn't really like a long time thing. And these were kind of what made up, in my opinion, the bulk of Pioneer Day in a way, because every year was different, and this is what you do for fun if you're not, you know, not getting drunk at the frat parties.
What year would this have been, Sean?
I forget, I want to say 70s? Yeah, a lot of these photos I added a while ago, and I thought I had a list of them, but lost it somewhere. But yeah. And there was like a P-Day committee that kind of like did this. This was in, I believe, either the newspaper or potentially the program souvenir that the Pioneer Day committee would put out. And they had some level of control, but not really. Their control was more suggestions than hard rules. Because, you know, even if there were events and stuff that weren't necessarily on this list, but would still be kind of in that spirit of Pioneer Day. Now, the big one, obviously, the parade. This was the, big finisher, right? You know, end of the week. And so this actually, oddly enough, has origins even before Pioneer Day, just as like Chico's May Day parade. Just sort of a general, you know, spring parade kind of thing. But quickly, once Pioneer Day gets up and running, it gets just like subsumed into Pioneer Day. And it becomes the Pioneer Day parade. The other interesting thing is this was run basically by the town. The school had really no say in this. So when tensions arose, this is where the town kind of exerted their own control. And the other cool thing is that this was a huge event, right? It wasn't the school, the frats built floats, as did like local businesses and even some larger businesses and organizations. I actually have a list later on. And I saw one year that this drew like a 45,000 person crowd. Like this was a big event. And that kind of, I think, also scared people a bit. Now, before we talk about all of the rough stuff in this, I want to talk about some of the good stuff that it did, just kind of balance it out a little bit. Yeah, there's that parade lineup. You can see like Woodstock's Pizza, Speedy Burrito, and a ton of people. There's 104 there. A lot of them are frats. We also have things like the Dunsmuir Elementary School band. Just like a ton of people. Okay. And that's kind of the thing that Pioneer Day did, was it was this huge community event that really brought the community together, especially with Chico kind of always having a little bit of a rift between longtime residents and some of the students. This really helped to pull that together, and everybody could sort of get together and have a good time. And it was also, a lot of these are businesses, of course, and that meant really good for Chico's economy. It stimulated a lot of local spending. People would spend a bunch of their own money, and things like the frats building the quads probably gave a good amount of money to Chico's lumber industry. And it also brought in a bunch of money from outside with the parade, bringing 45,000 people in, right? Everybody's coming in, spending money. It's really good. Here you can see an ad from Shop and Save. Everybody got into it, and this is nowhere near the only ad that has a Pioneer Day theme to it. And that the Pioneer Day souvenirs are actually about half ads, and they're all pretty much all custom drawn Pioneer Day ads. These aren't just things slotted in. And it also really kind of put Chico on the map in a larger sense because it got more national attention. Some of it was not so great, such as the attention from Playboy and MTV, which, yeah. So now we can talk about some of the bad stuff, which this is kind of where a lot of the cracks that were kind of in Pioneer Day from the beginning, this is where they really start to show and eventually break. So first, obviously, the rowdiness with all the parties and the drinking and the drugs and all that. It was pretty appalling to the residents, some of the stuff that was occurring, such as, 1927, where they said no more next year, it got too bad. And the other big one was 1952, students supposed to have unloaded firearms. Somebody was still injured with a blank round, but still pretty seriously injured. Yeah, and the town kind of just saw that as this excuse for partying and rowdiness and just kind of having a fun time, which the town wasn't opposed to having a fun time, they just didn't want people getting hurt. And the school was also really not happy with the grades there, because pretty early